Good evening, everyone. My name is Jeff Green, and I'm the director of the Andre Mitchell Center for the Study of Democracy. Welcome to tonight's debate, sponsored by the Mitchell Center along with the Penn Political Union. When the Penn Political Union and the Mitchell Center decided to partner and create on a permanent basis this endeavor 3 years ago, we had as a vision that students would not only have a chance to be in a place where they could debate each other from across the ideological spectrum, but they could also debate and engage outside speakers, politicians, and other prominent thought leaders from the broader society. And tonight, we're realizing that vision in spades. We're so honored to have with us tonight Jeb Bush, who is a two-term governor from the state of Florida, America's third largest state, and in the time since has been a prominent national figure, a presidential candidate in 2016, and someone who has contributed to a wide array of policy issues throughout his career. I think many of you are aware of Governor Bush's accomplishments and achievements. One other distinction, which you might not be as aware of, is that Governor Bush is in the midst of his sophomore year at Penn, where he's returned as the Andre Mitchell Center Presidential Professor of Practice. And in his time at Penn, he's participated in, I would estimate, around 15 events so far. They've all been extremely well attended and well received and have reflected Governor Bush's vast political knowledge, his humor, his candor, and perhaps most of all, the spirit of civility, for which I think he has earned a very well-deserved reputation. So I want to thank him for being here. And I also want to thank Perry Worldhouse for allowing us to meet in their beautiful space and helping with the logistics. And finally, I want to thank Sarah Root, who is the speaker of the Penn Political Union. And it's under her leadership that the union is off to a tremendous start this year, having already had numerous exciting, well-attended, and engaged debates. And I'm sure there'll be many more to come in the months that follow. But tonight, right here, is a milestone event for the political union and for civic dialogue at Penn. Thank you all for being here. I'll turn things over now to Sarah Root.
Hi, everyone. As Professor Green mentioned, my name is Sarah Root, and I'm the speaker of the Penn Political Union. I'm excited to see you all out here tonight. There's a lot of new faces in the audience, which is very exciting. I'd like to welcome our debaters as well. And our resolution today is resolved: the U.S. should implement a merit-based immigration system. On our proposition, we have Governor Jeb Bush, who will be supporting the resolution, and our opposition consists of Javier Cuadras, Tory Borlase, and James Kwong, who will be opposing the resolution. So I'm going to just give you guys a brief overview of how the debate will work. So to begin, each side will present a 7-minute opening argument, followed by 3 body speech arguments where they will expand on their main points of the debate. In between each set of body speech arguments, we will accept 1 question from the audience. Following this, there will be a 30-minute question and answer session where the audience will ask questions of the debaters. And then this will be followed by 2 5-minute closing speeches, one given by each side, and a vote by the audience. Oh, yeah. So, without further ado, I would like to welcome our proposition to take the stand.
Opposition?
Proposition.
I thought I was in favor. Oh, proposition, sorry. Thank you. No, I'm good, I think. You all can hear me, right? Thank you very much. I'm intimidated. I know these very talented Penn students probably went to debate. They were top debaters in high school, and they probably did it in college. I never did any of that, but I truly believe that our immigration system needs to be modernized. There are a lot of reasons for that. Modernized, by the way, in keeping the noble traditions of being an open society. I've written a book about it. It's called Immigration Wars. It was not a bestseller. But if you read it, just read the first chapter. It outlines a vision of a comprehensive immigration strategy that would allow people to come in, as they always have for refugee status, allow people to come in for temporary visas to be able to move in and out based on needs of our economy, would allow people to come in seeking asylum. I believe we should expedite that process to make sure that people have a well-founded fear of persecution, can have their grievances expedited quickly to determine whether they should be allowed to stay in our country. But also it should be used as an incredible catalyst for sustained economic activity. Here's the deal, demography is destiny. In our country, we're getting older each and every year. We're forming less families. We're having less children. And the demographic pyramid of the United States, which has historically been like this and led the nation, particularly developed countries, where we have younger people constantly moving up into the economic activities of the country, now it's inverting. And for young people, you should be concerned about that. We have a $50 trillion contingent liability called the unfunded liabilities of Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and Obamacare. No one has any plan to pay for it, and I can guarantee you, even if you did have a plan to pay for it, if we continue to get older, forming less families, and having less children, there won't be anybody there to pay for it. So one of the reasons why I believe we need to move to an economically driven, merit-based immigration system is the simple facts that immigrants are younger, they form more families, they have more children, they own more businesses, they own more patents, they create more economic activity, they commit less crimes than native-born Americans. That's not an opinion, those are facts. And it seems to me if we're trying to compete in a global economy, what we ought to do is to say, bring the best and the brightest to our country. Let them come pursue their dreams, and do so in a way that creates prosperity for all of us. That will require, at least in my mind, a change in how we allow people petitioned by family members. Today in America, since 1965, spouse and minor children are allowed in, petitioned by family. Every country in the world allows that. That's kind of it'd be impossible to imagine not allowing your wife or your young children to be able to be reunited if you're petitioning them. But we're the only country in the world. There's not a single other country in the world that has the expanded definition of family to include adult siblings and adult parents. And over a period of time, we have, the pejorative term is chain migration, but we have basically a crowding out of economic immigrants, and we have people coming now petitioned by family that don't make the same kind of economic contribution that could happen if you expanded the number of people coming for economic purposes. We have a 6 million person skills gap, 6 million jobs unfilled because people don't have the skills to fill it. It is our duty as a country to make sure that we do everything we can to make sure Americans have those gaps, fill those jobs. But in the interim, doesn't it make sense to allow people to come in, make an immediate contribution, create more sustained economic activity for more people? I think it does. By the way, the expanded definition of family was created in early 1960s, and it was done to make sure, it was done by conservatives in Congress to assure that more Europeans would be allowed to come into the country because there was a concern that somehow we were going to no longer be a white country. That was why that was added. Only country in the world to have it, and it was a way to provide incentives for more Europeans to come in. Well, they stuck around in their own country by and large, and we've been blessed with people coming from all over the world. Now I think it's time for us to say, we want the best and the brightest, and we want them to come to make an immediate contribution, and I know they will. So I advocate this change in policy that will help us with our demographics, it will help us with our economy, and it will restore right now, which has been tarnished, an incredibly noble tradition of being an open society. The fact that people come from everywhere is a benefit. It's a blessing for our country. And it'll continue to be a blessing if people can make economic contributions that will allow them to be successful and all of us being successful along the way. The final thing I'd say is immigration won't work if we don't remind ourselves of what we have in common, what our shared values are. American citizenship, being an American, is not defined by race like it is in Japan. It's not some exclusionary kind of belief. It's a set of shared values. And Whether you're native born or newly arrived, we all ought to adhere to those values. We need to know what our heritage is that created our country with warts and all. It's the most spectacular country in the world, and immigrants have made a major contribution in that regard. We need to have a set of shared values, remind ourselves of what they are, because that's what unites us. And that's what makes immigration so extraordinary in our country, rather than you see the travails in Europe and other places where it's hard for immigrants to be absorbed in and gain the national identity. I think this is the right thing to do, and I hope you agree with me. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. First, I'd like to thank Governor Bush for being here tonight to have this debate. I'd also like to extend a huge thank you to Penn Political Union, Perry World House, and all the other organizations that made this possible. Now on to the question. Should the United States adopt a merit-based immigration system? To this, we say no. First, what does our immigration system look like now? And what do we think our immigration system would look like if we adopted a merit-based system? In the status quo, according to the Migration Policy Institute, about 45% of people...
Move the mic a little closer, because I...
Mic's on me.
Oh.
She's mine.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm sorry? Okay. According to the Migration Policy Institute, about 45% of people who receive green cards are immediate relatives of U.S. citizens, 21% were family-related immigrants, 13% were refugee or asylum status, 5% were diversity lottery winners, and 12% were employment-based. We think that the adoption of a merit-based immigration system would significantly increase and change these percentages in two ways. First, it would increase the proportion of employment-based visas above the current allocation of 12%, which would mean a lower percentage of refugee, diversity, and family visas. Why do we think this is the case? Presumably, a merit-based immigration system would require shifting the main number of immigrants accepted into the United States to be high-skilled workers. This doesn't mean changing the percentage of employment-based visas from 12% to 15%. It means overhauling the system to accept more than 50% of employment-based visas and high-skilled workers at that. Second, the proportion of high-skilled workers to low-skilled workers would shift drastically. This means having less agricultural workers and less visas allocated to those without higher education degrees and extensive work experiences. But in order to determine how this debate should be evaluated, we need to understand what the United States values and prioritizes. We think that the United States was founded on principles like freedom from persecution and the opportunity to live a good life. However, most things in our Bill of Rights are in place to protect traditional liberal values, such as freedom of speech and privacy, not really the freedom for excessive economic gain. Throughout our history, we have generally shifted away from the notion that freedom is only economic in nature, but rather towards preferring social, religious, and personal freedom. When we outlawed slavery, we recognized that excessive economic success is not something that should supersede human rights and human dignity. The economic freedom for a few people to make billions of dollars should not outweigh basic freedoms for others. That same sentiment is reflected in our current immigration system, which is family-based. By accepting refugees, families, and those less fortunate than us, we practice our American values and continue the positive progress that we have made since the conception of our country. Moving towards a merit-based system inherently negates the progress that we've made, conveying the message that the only people who deserve to be in America are the ones that can bring some type of economic benefits. Governor Bush just talked about how our economy is aging and that we are forming less families. This is precisely why we need to have a more family-based approach. When we only have merit-based, we have people who come for work and do precisely that. He brought up the reason that the new definition of family was added was to bring more Europeans, but that's not how it operates now. We see a huge amount of diversity in the types of people that come to the country with a family-based system. Separate from that, there are likely two main reasons we anticipate that the governor will advocate for a merit-based system as a solution to current problems. The first is fixing the immigration system, and the second is economic success. We think that fixing the immigration system does not have to rely on a systematic exclusion of certain people who will tend to be poorer and in more need of all the benefits the United States claims to offer indiscriminately. Instead of trying to fix our broken immigration system by establishing criteria that advantage male English-speaking Europeans who are more likely to qualify for Governor Bush's idea of merit, we should focus on employing more immigration judges and making the system more transparent, which are both solutions that will not only benefit applicants but also Americans. Also, we believe that making immigration to this country more difficult would encourage people to immigrate in ways outside of the system, especially because these people are usually in situations that are unlivable, oppressive, and dangerous. By telling refugees and those with suffering families that there exists no system to process them, we are communicating that they must resort to extreme measures to provide to their families. Secondly, we will argue today that merit-based systems don't actually provide any genuine economic advantages to the United States, and instead harm US citizens in a number of ways. We believe that when companies have a larger incentive to hire foreign workers, wages go down, including for American citizens. We also think that hiring an overwhelming number of immigrants for high-skilled jobs will mean that less US citizens with crushing debt from earning a degree will be able to find jobs to pay off their student loans or economically contribute to society. We also think that while immigrants are important participants in the economy, their families provide important support systems that help them be the successful individuals that they are destined to be. Overall, we believe that having a merit-based system will be less beneficial to the United States and should be rejected in favor of more common sense reforms. Thank you.
Just so everyone is aware, the debaters themselves this mic is off. So if you can't hear, signal to the debaters, don't signal to them for them to turn this mic. With that, I would like to welcome our first body speech, Governor Jeb Bush.
How long do I have?
5 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Let me be clear. The proposal that I lay out here says to narrow the number of people that come by family to the definition that every other country in the world has, spouse and minor children. That would narrow the number of people coming through the family petition process by about 250 to 300,000 people. I am not advocating eliminating people coming that have a well-founded fear of persecution. In fact, I think we should go back to the norms of 100,000 people, more or less, which was the norms prior to the Trump administration. We do stand for human rights and values, and it's important for us to stand on that, whether it's to support the folks seeking freedom in Western China or in all parts of the world or Hong Kong. We do stand for freedom, and we should. And when people have a well-founded fear of persecution, they should be welcomed in our country. Nothing in my proposal would suggest that that should be eliminated. Nothing in my proposal would suggest that a guest worker program to deal with areas where there is no possibility that native-born Americans can access jobs would be treated. In fact, I would call that a merit-based immigration policy. In the fields of California and Texas and Florida, crops go barren. The land goes barren because they don't have workers who would like to come and go. The reason why we have 11 million undocumented workers in many cases is they're fearful of leaving because they're fearful of being able to come back. And so having a guest worker program for this temporary help, typically seasonal, makes a lot of sense, and that should be part of an economic strategy. I would add that generally what people believe to have the most viable economic immigration system is Canada and Australia, two countries that are very open and very multinational, if you will, and multi-ethnic. And they embrace people from all walks of life from every part of the world. They have more economic immigrants in Australia and in Canada than the United States does, even though they have 1/10 of the population. And they've figured out how to do this based on economic needs for the country, and it is not a zero-sum game. The idea that somehow someone that comes and strives for success is taking away someone else's economic opportunity is not how the economy works. In fact, all of us interacting amongst ourselves in a dynamic way will create more opportunities for more people. And it seems to me we would want to have dynamic people in pursuit of their own dreams, forming their families here with a desire and a striving desire for success to be the option that happens more and more often. Look at the immigrant groups that have been successful economically in our country. There are places like India with the highest economic per capita income. Indian families have the highest economic income in the United States. Nigerian Americans. These are people that they take risks to come here, and they can make contributions fairly quickly. I'm not suggesting that everybody seeking a PhD is part of this strategy. I think everybody that's seeking a PhD ought to stay in our country, to be honest with you. But that's not the point of this. The point is, with an additional 300 to 400,000 immigrants that we pick based on our own economic needs, we would have a catalyst for sustained economic growth where everybody benefits. It would also help, by the way, that we opened up our doors for merit-based student university participation. Great universities like Penn, I don't know if they talk about this, their foreign students are a significant part of their sustainability. And the idea that we crack down on foreign students, because God forbid they would want to stay in our country and make a contribution after gaining the best degree possible, makes no sense to me either. So this is not an effort to restrict people's pursuit of happiness that are already here. This is not an idea that is racist in overtone. With all due respect, when we narrowed the number of people, when we expanded the number of people coming for family, it was based on a racist idea. And the net effect was that we've had the benefit of having people from all around the world come in. I find that wonderful. But I do think that we have an obligation to create sustained economic growth. And the benefits of that go way beyond economics. It also goes to reinvigorating our culture and making life better for all Americans.
Welcome our first body speech from the opposition.
The American dream isn't just some phrase taught in high school to high school students. It is an ideal embodied in the very fabric of our nation. It's one that has been around since before America became America. In colonial times, Pennsylvania was called one of the best poor man's country in the world. Now we talk of closing the gate. We talk about limiting immigration to a select few. In fact, the proposed merit-based system would have excluded my own parents from coming to this country. They simply didn't have the necessary English language proficiency that all merit-based systems need. Yet who can claim that they haven't immensely benefited this country? The answer is no one. My parents are proud contributors to this society. They have since learned English. They've gone on to higher education. My mom got a master's in computer science. They pay their taxes in full, something I will note some native-born citizens can't even claim. And this story isn't unique. Where I grew up, this story was a norm. So let us examine the word merit. Let us actually look at what basis with which we want to exclude people. I don't know if Governor Bush knows this, but the incoming first-year class had to read Kathy O'Neill's Weapons of Math Destruction as part of our theme year. And one of O'Neill's points is that in order to quantify some vague word like merit, people need proxies. And proxies are inexact. They have unintended consequences. So when we use education, especially STEM degrees, and English language proficiency to quantify merit, as is the case for most merit-based systems, we invite such unintended consequences. Here's one. Our immigration will be dominated by men. Women on average receive far less schooling. Worldwide, only 35% of women are STEM students compared to men. For example, India, the second highest source of immigration to Canada, there are 2.6 million more men enrolled in education than women. Another, we drastically reduce diversity of immigrants to this country. We would exclude Africans and Central and South Americans. Eliminating diversity visas and giving points based off English language proficiency guarantees that. Diversity benefits this country. It's one of our values. And if we want a strong economy, then we shouldn't take measures to reduce it. In fact, companies with more culturally and ethnically diverse executive teams were 33% more likely to see above average profits. Moreover, the purpose of inviting meritorious people to this country is to help the American economy succeed and fill open positions. Let's look at the numbers. Out of the 5 fastest growing jobs in this country, only 1 requires a degree higher than a high school diploma. For example, personal and home healthcare aides, a set of jobs that will add 1.185 million people in the next decade, jobs that can't be automated, require only a high school diploma. I'd like to ask Governor Bush, who is he going to find that's willing to take these crucial jobs, low-paying though they are, if not immigrants? And for his reference to guest worker visas, in Switzerland, they have a guest worker visa program. But what we'll know is that guest workers don't integrate as well as natural citizens do. And I want to focus on personal home healthcare aides because I think this example highlights another important notion. Education measures knowledge. not intelligence, and certainly not emotional intelligence. It doesn't measure how kind you are, how empathetic you are, whether or not you can relate to the person sitting next to you. All qualities I will note can't be replicated by a computer or robot, and therefore will be crucial to the jobs once automation takes over. I'd also like to take a moment here to look at Canada and Australia. Both countries Governor Bush has highlighted. Dr. Hawthorne, a researcher in Melbourne, notes that maintaining highly educated immigrants that do come to these countries have difficulties finding and maintaining employment. In other words, it doesn't matter if the immigrants are highly skilled, because Canada and Australia aren't able to utilize them to their maximum potential. This is in part due to the fact that family is actually an important factor in whether or not you succeed. The people you depend on, the people that will be there for you, can make or break your integration. So really, a merit-based system would be almost self-defeating. Finally, I just want to note some hypocrisy attached to current merit-based systems. The RAISE Act, Trump's merit-based immigration proposal, which Governor Bush has complemented, awards points to invest $1.8 million into a new commercial enterprise in America. We actually have a form that's now called the EB-5 visa that's available to investors willing to impart $500,000 to $1 million. Instead of growing the American economy, the EB-5 visa program has simply created a system where the rich buy their way to American citizenship. Why should you be able to write a check to bypass the system, I ask? How is being rich the same as having merit? And the answer is, it isn't. An immigration system shouldn't be based on your wealth or your gender or your ethnicity. It should be one that embraces the American dream. It should be one that believes in the idea that all people who work hard and dedicate themselves to achieving prosperity deserve to come. And a merit-based system doesn't do that.
And I wanted to personally say the Liberal Party actually was the party that introduced merit-based immigration in Canada in 1967. And so that is the center-left party. So I personally find it quite ridiculous that the Democrats actually don't support merit-based immigration. But I guess my question is, what is your opinion on Trump's recent revoking of the H-1B visas? Because I think has had a big impact on the immigration and visa system in the States.
Who is this directed to?
So there has been abuse of the H-1B visa system. When I was campaigning, I'll give you an example. Several fired Disney IT workers came to me to a town hall meeting in New Hampshire, and they were fired because of basically because their age meant their cost of labor was higher, the benefits were higher, and they were replaced by Indian IT, not Disney hired IT workers, but by people that were outsourced by one of the big outsourced Indian businesses whose name escapes me right now. And that is an abuse of the law. That is not, there are regulations that should, in the existing law, pre-President Trump's new changes. Look, first of all, let me make it clear here, because there's been kind of a few comments that relate to somehow that the American dream can't happen when you allow people to come and pursue their dreams and be successful. I mean, that's kind of what Elon Musk has done. It's kind of what Sergey Brin has done. It's kind of like what most of Silicon Valley is based on. These are foreign-born folks that have come and they've created tremendous wealth and opportunities. The immigrant experience, most of us have had firsthand knowledge of it. I have. My wife is from Mexico. And the idea that somehow I would be proposing closing down the borders to not allow people to come in is foolhardy, just to be honest with you. Our lives are enriched by the diversity of this country, and as I said, when we restore a set of shared values of what it is to be American, the diversity becomes an enormous catalyst of an advantage over the rest of the world. So can we administer our immigration laws better? Yeah. Can we make it, when someone files for, has a well-founded fear of persecution, should it take 3 years? No. Should it be easier for people to come and go back and forth based on economic need? One of the things that Canadians do really well is establish what the needs are. So they don't bring everybody that comes in because they're rich or because they're white. They come in because they have labor shortages and they want to sustain economic activity. I'd say the principal reason why Australia's had 26 years of sustained economic growth is their open immigration system and their open trading system. And we have had great economic success as well, but I think it would make sense to look at the benefits of systems that are focused on rising income for all Americans. And an immigration system that deals with this would be helpful. The other thing I would challenge my worthy opponents on is, if you have family members petitioning family members, as we now have, you end up having someone, beautiful mom, don't get me wrong, I'm 66, so just for the record here, I like that age. But what economic impact when someone petitions a sibling or an adult parent, what immediate economic impact are they going to have on our country? We're not excluding people when we have the most open system in the world. We're the only country that has this broad definition of family petitioning. In the countries that other people admire, they have spouse and minor children. Why doesn't it make sense for us to go back to what we had before? The change occurred, to remind everybody, to make sure that we would have more European immigrants. And thankfully, that didn't work because Europe was prospering and people were happy to stay there. But isn't it appropriate to change policy after 50 years when it's not having the kind of effect that we need? That 300,000 additional people that would come from family reunification, eliminating that broad definition, could be a catalyst for finding the next cure. Could be a catalyst for accelerating economic progress to make sure that everybody benefits. I do agree that people, low-income jobs, taking care of elderly people are going to be around a long way. Robots doing that. But I'm not sure that should be the economic strategy, the immigration strategy of the United States. Again? I'm running out of gas here. Let me think. What can I talk about that would that relates to immigration? Let me go back to just some facts of how our immigration system works. We have about 1,100,000 legal immigrants that come every year. We have a population of 330 million people. For those that are concerned that we have too many immigrants, this percentage of our population, about 15.5%, is more or less what it was, way below the peaks of the late 1800s, more or less the norm of the 20th century. It's moved back up to that point. We've had times where we've had exclusionary policies that have narrowed the number of people coming from immigration, and our economic benefits we didn't see the same kind of economic benefits. The tendency today isn't to open up our immigration system, it's to narrow it down. And particularly with this administration using this as a political wedge issue. And on the left, we have a political wedge issue as well, which is open borders, eliminate ICE, all these things that are, they may be an emotional sentiment that garners support, but it is foolhardy to suggest that we shouldn't control our borders. And frankly, it's foolhardy to narrow the number of people that can make an immediate contribution. What I'm proposing is the middle way, the middle ground, that is based in solid facts about the potential for this to be of benefit. If it doesn't bother people in this crowd that a $50 trillion net present value, it seems, maybe it's too big for people to really get their arms around. In 15 years, there's going to be one or two things will happen if we don't change our demographics, and immigration is the surefire way of making that a reality. We're going to have benefit cuts for people that are already on one of these programs, or we're going to have massive tax increases, or both. And if we want to get this right, the social contract shouldn't have to be torn asunder. I would argue that a sustained economic immigration policy will help us protect the social contract that is really important for the same people that you're concerned about. The shut-in elders, the people that need care, they will not get those benefits unless we change our demographic destiny.
Okay, before I start my speech, I would like to talk about some of the points that Governor Bush talked about. He said that Sergey Brin, the co-founder of Google, came to this country as an immigrant, but he didn't come here based on merit. He was a refugee, so I have to clarify that. Now, technology has given humanity the ability to become ever more aware of countries and ways of life different than their own. Technology will only continue to advance and become even more accessible to all people. Regardless of their circumstances, today, potential immigrants are increasingly better able to weigh the costs and benefits of immigrating to a new country thanks to technology bringing exposure to the opportunities in the United States. This ability to create a cost-benefit analysis is not specific to merit-deserving individuals. For instance, those who live across our southern border that want to create a better future for themselves take this cost-benefit model into account when choosing whether to embark on a dangerous 2,000-mile trek to reach the United States or to instead remain in their home country. Now, you may be thinking, what do these points have to do with merit-based immigration? Well, merit-based immigration would disproportionately impact poor immigrants with little to no education and would deter them from immigrating to the US. Yet, it is important to note that these are the same individuals who are arguably the most motivated to come to the US when they weigh the costs and benefits to illegally or legally immigrate. So when immigrants decide to risk their lives and at times the lives of their loved ones to reunite with their family in the United States, they aren't doing so out of a simple desire. They're doing it based on need. This nation has seen the tragic images of a drowned father and daughter who passed away trying to cross the Rio Grande. Unfortunately, these scenes are not new for those that reside in border communities. By taking a merit-based approach to our immigration system, we are not incentivizing legal immigration, nor are we making our legal immigration process easier in order to prevent unnecessary deaths by migrants. Instead, we are disincentivizing legal immigration while destroying hope for those who seek to immigrate to the US. The message that prospective immigrants hear is that their chances of acquiring legal status has decreased, and their best option to live in the US is to immigrate illegally through dangerous methods. Merit-based immigration reform cannot serve its purpose if it does not give significant consideration to those who are left living in the shadows because of its exclusionary foundations. Any rational person can understand that people do not have an innate desire to be illegal on foreign land, nor do they want to be singled out for being foreigners in a land where this part of their identity can lead to a detrimental outcome. Those who come to our country through illegal, dangerous, and life-threatening channels do so because they recognize that waiting 15 to 25 years for an opportunity for citizenship and having to dish up thousands upon thousands of dollars is not feasible. Adopting a merit-based approach to our immigration system will increase the wait time for those seeking a visa through family preference. This wait time will increase because it replaces the spots held for immigrants applying through a family-based immigration law with merit immigration laws. Now, people continue to ask, why can't immigrants just come here legally? Well, 14% of those who are waiting to apply for a green card in 2018 would die without seeing a green card if they refused to give up and continued with their application indefinitely. It will take many other immigrants decades, and in some categories, a half-century or more to process everyone else waiting. If you dramatically limit family-based immigration, as Governor Bush proposes, then you create an incentive for illegal immigration because, as previously mentioned, immigrants are willing to risk their life to come to the United States even when they are not guaranteed the right to apply for citizenship. So let's instead bring them with visas in an orderly fashion. This was good in the past. It helped the Polish, the Irish, the Germans. It helped millions of people come and build America. And I can assure you that the immigrants of today are creating jobs and taking the jobs that are needed for America to run efficiently.
One of the things that really frustrates me about the current immigration system in the US is that a lot of our classmates won't be able to stay in the US after we graduate. And I've seen some of my friends get really good jobs in the US and still not be able to stay because their companies weren't allowed, they couldn't keep them there, we couldn't get the employment visas. So is there anything on the opposition side? Would you consider having like a larger employment visa lottery or something beyond, so some amount of merit immigration on this extent so our classmates can stay in the US?
Yeah, so I think there's a number of things to discuss there because, again, a lot of my friends are in the same situation as well. I think specifically for temporary visas and stuff like that, the reason a lot of people aren't allowed to stay is because the specific requirements that the government sets on their visa. For example, like people who get a STEM degree are allowed to stay a little bit longer. So why do we have that prioritization now, and why can't we adjust that specific thing rather than changing the number of visas? Because of the fact that they're already here, it's more of a debate about whether or not we should extend the time they're here and allow them to actually get these jobs and to process their citizenship. Secondly, I think this is also a problem with how the United States, what they deem merit. So I think that a reason that maybe they're not allowed to like find these jobs is because we are not prioritizing what is actually quote unquote merit. Like James said, we do have a lot of fields that have growing numbers of jobs available, but it's not necessarily the things that the United States thinks is meritable and charitable. So I think it's less about the number of visas that we have and more about how we decide to treat these people after their visa expires.
Sure. I think if someone gets a postgraduate degree in one of our great universities, they should get a visa along with that degree. It just makes no sense to me. It's not a zero-sum game. You can be for, you can support the opposition's position of expanded definition of family and also expand the number of people coming that are qualified to add value immediately. But it makes no sense. We're training people in some cases to compete against us. It's foolhardy, it seems to me, and we now are actually imperiling some of our universities' sustainability by restricting the number of people that are coming, and then requiring them to leave makes no sense. The other thing I would add is, so you get employer-based, you get a job and you get your visa, and for those that are here temporarily, they're trapped. The minute they stop working, maybe they have a better job availability. Maybe they want to start their own business. Maybe there's all sorts of things that happen in life. You're not going to work for whatever the business is for the rest of your life, but you can't move if you're in many of these visa categories. And so I would suggest that we focus on a broader definition of what an economic immigrant looks like to give them the flexibility to be successful over the long haul.
Okay. We're going to go to the third
Okay. Okay. You may have noticed my speeches are getting a little shorter as we go along, but so back to the facts of where we stand in our immigration policy. 75% of immigrants, legal immigrants, come through family petitioning. 46% of those are defined as I've described what I think the proper approach would be, which every other country has. Not a single country in the world has this broader definition, its spouse and minor children. 46%. So I'm not advocating eliminating all family visa petitioners. What I'm suggesting is half of the million people that come to our country could come by family. 10 to 12%, 14% or 15% could be a category for refugees because, but for us who, in many cases. Other countries do step up in this regard, including, by the way, Canada and Australia, that accept large number of refugees as well. And that's a noble tradition because the United States should stand for human rights. And when we pull back, ugly things happen around the world. And I think there's other elements of our immigration system that we can maintain. What I'm suggesting is to take that 21% that is now growing in numbers. Each and every year it gets bigger, and creating an economic strategy that allows people to come in to make an immediate contribution to our society. It's not a white policy. It's not a rich person's policy. To the contrary, I do agree with my opponent's view that people that want to come to this country are taking risks, and it should be admired and respected that they take risks. Maybe we should make it a more formal process to allow people to take the risk of leaving their home country, be separated from their families, to pursue what they consider the American dream. I think that is a catalyst for all sorts of benefits for our society. The final thing I'd suggest to you is that people that come here from the Northern Triangle countries, I admire their courage for doing this. But is it appropriate to create a system that was basically done by judicial edict, where if you touch the border, you're allowed in? And here are the facts. I do support their process if they have a well-founded fear of persecution, but when 800,000 people cross the border, it creates massive dislocations. And no country in the world says, I'm going to abandon my responsibilities of control of one's border. China doesn't do it. Japan is blessed by it being an island nation. That makes it a little bit easier. No country does this because it creates chaos. So those people that come in, they take risks. They're paying coyotes to do this, by the way. They're paying up to $15,000 to come to the country. They're processed into the country. They normally go to where their communities exist. Many of them are in Miami, Florida, where I live. Hondurans and Guatemalans go to South Florida, not completely. The Salvadorans go to Washington or Los Angeles. The immigration courts are overwhelmed. It takes 2 years to process that claim. And at the end of that process, about 90% are going to be ruled that they don't have a well-founded fear of persecution. And then 6 months to a year later, they'll receive their deportation order. And guess how many people show up? No one in this room, nor myself, would show up to say, okay, I guess I went through the process and now I'm going to go back home to a place that I left because there was no opportunities. That's the process we have. That is an abuse of the refugee system in our country, and we need to reform it so that if you have a well-founded claim of persecution or domestic violence or the child welfare system is being threatened where children are being enslaved, let that adjudication process happen at a much faster rate and allow people to stay that have that well-founded fear of persecution judged. But in no way am I suggesting that we eliminate people pursuing that claim. It is appropriate to modernize it and make it work, but I'm not suggesting eliminating refugees coming to our country. It is an incredibly noble tradition that breaks, and I wish Sergey Brin, if we could clone him, I'd take 20 more of him and all the other people that come irrespective of their level of education to be successful. The immigrant communities in this country are the most dynamic, as I've said, and most entrepreneurial, and it would be helpful for us with anemic economic growth to be able to jumpstart the growth so that more people can benefit. Thank you.
So first, I think it's important to establish what merit will mean under this system. We think that based on what James told you, you have to use proxies to kind of determine what merit means, and the most likely proxies are going to be wealth and education. I think it's really unfair that people should be allowed to buy their way in by being able to afford an education and being able to afford to qualify for these certain things. And also, Governor Bush never responded to the point that the typical gender makeup of these people would be predominantly male, white Europeans. And we don't see how this definition of merit will change enough to allow a more diverse number of people that are coming to the country, especially because diversity has been shown to help economic benefits for companies. It's been shown to have a 33% increase in success. So why do we think that having these more people in the country is not necessarily exclusive with not having a merit-based system? So I think it's important to remember that we aren't just defending a family-based immigration system. We're just saying that we shouldn't have a merit-based system. So what this looks like is we could take a lot of other different approaches to reforming the industry and the way that we process these things. So that could look like maybe changing the number of years people are allowed to stay after their visa, but we don't think we necessarily need to have more people coming here without their families and without that support system that helps them be so successful. So an example of this is maybe we could have more judges in the immigration system, but why don't we think that would be politically possible when we implement an immigration system that is merit-based? So I think that presumably to change any policy in the United States, we have to use a lot of political capital to get that done. And once you pass this, people are going to be unwilling and unlikely to make any future changes to our immigration system that will actually be impactful. So we think it's going to trade off directly from having probably more and more beneficial systems put in place. Also, we think that there's alternatives to having, just increasing the number of overall merit-based immigrants. We can just increase the overall number of immigrants, right? We don't have to change the necessary percentages within this system, right? So we can still take 12% of people based on employment, but we can just increase the number that 12% makes up. So we can increase the number of people that we're allowing to come to the country. I think this would solve a lot of the problems that Governor Bush is saying that a merit-based system could solve. So we think it's still important that these people can have the familial support and actually be allowed to bring their families in. So he brings up Canada's example, but in Canada, you're actually allowed to bring your grandparents. So the way the system works is not the way he'd be proposing, and these people get the support of extended family to come. So if the system works so well like that, we think that we should maintain the family support there and actually, have more of a family base and have more of this refugee and refugee-inspired immigration. And so we also think that having a family behind you helps people settle and actually helps them get more involved in the economy faster, right? So when you're not worrying about if your family back home is suffering and dying, you can actually be more engaged in your workplace and help, get that business started. So the problem that Governor Bush addressed is that these people probably can't jump into their jobs right away, and it's difficult for them to get acclimated. We think that having their family with them will probably help them do that a little bit better. Also, we think that it's important to discuss, the economic impact of this. So remember that in the United States right now, there's 2.1 million people with a STEM degree that are unemployed. So what this means is in the United States, people who are, U.S. citizens and who were born here are not there's no need to have people with STEM degrees because we already have people that are way qualified to actually take these jobs. We need to change the definition of quote-unquote merit, and we need to change the criterion in order to have people that might fill spaces like healthcare. And this is really unlikely under a merit-based immigration system because we don't think anyone's going to be able to quantify, how much emotional intelligence you have. And it's way easier to default to quantifying, maybe how many degrees you have or how much money you have. So we think that that's always going to be the way that people process merit and the way that people are going to deem what is important. So finally, we think that family-based immigration and the immigration system that is not merit-based will have a good impact on the economy. So first, if someone is coming to the United States and they're leaving their family behind, they're probably going to want to send remittances to them, which means that money is not being spent in the US economy. So if they bring their family over and they're not sending the money back to this other country, these families are probably going to spend it in the United States as well, which is going to lead to more economic prosperity for the United States if we're prioritizing that. So overall, we think that one, we don't think that merit is a good assessor of what the United States needs in our economy right now. Two, we think that family, as shown in Canada, is really helpful to people being productive. And three, we think that the economy is going to be benefited by not having to send money back to the families in other countries. Thank you.
The second speaker of opposition spoke out rather emphatically against merit-based immigration. Does this mean you're principally opposed to immigration at all as an idea, or do you support a sort of free-for-all as exists in East Europe and parts of the Middle East, in the hopes that by some miracle of fate there's gender equality with the male-female ratio, or that the immigrants are emphatic and care for thy neighbor?
I'm not sure exactly. Can you ask a question just in a straight manner? Because you said a lot of facts.
If not for merit-based immigration, what system or what model would you let immigrants into the country?
Okay, so that's a topic that doesn't really align with adopting the proposition. I think what we're saying is we're not for a merit-based immigration reform, meaning we're open to exploring other options. And ultimately, what we're saying is that you don't have to take away family-based immigration to bring in more merit immigrants. We're just saying increase the population you're bringing in general, which means the amount of merit-based immigrants rises and everyone else stays the same. He's saying let's take away family-based immigrants and let's replace them with merit-based immigrants. We're for keeping both and increasing the population so his side is happy and our side is happy.
That's not what I said. What I said was half the people that come continue to come by family. 21% that come by the extended definition of family could come for economic purposes. Frankly, the idea that we have surpluses of STEM-related people that can't find jobs is just, with all due respect, is just not true. You ask anybody in any place of employment what the number one issue they have, and it's the lack of skilled workers, particularly in the STEM and IT fields.
Thanks. Firstly, thank you so much, Governor Bush, for coming here. It's really an honor to hear you speak. So I'm actually from Australia originally. So my family came in the early 90s.
Can't tell by your accent.
Yeah, no, it's faded. It's faded. Penn's kind of removed it. But yeah, they came in the early 90s, not under the merit-based system. And here in the States, I'm also an international student, so I understand the concerns regarding H-1B visas and things like that. So I'd actually like to problematize the Australian system a bit, because I feel like there are struggles that are faced by immigrants that don't stop once you gain citizenship. And those struggles look like trying to, there's like incredible loneliness, isolation, especially in a country that is often very racist towards you. And I think that it gets harder when you have only maybe 2 or 3 family members around you, when your children haven't maybe seen their grandparents in 10 years, when you have a very small circle around you. And I think that as much as in this debate we're talking about how immigrants are important insofar as economic value, I think it's also important to consider immigrants themselves and the lives that they live, especially because many of the immigrants that we're talking about in this debate who are bringing over family members are US citizens in and of themselves. And I think they will always feel like second-class citizens when they will never have the big family Thanksgiving gatherings that other American families can have. So my question, I guess, to probably Governor Bush is, how do you sort of justify weighting these economic considerations, especially if you cite fields like STEM, et cetera, which will probably accrue to probably relatively wealthier white Americans? How do you justify those benefits, weighing those benefits over the experiences of people who, immigrants and citizens in this country?
So first of all, let's blow up the myth that somehow the people that are in the STEM fields are white, and European. The history in the United States is that they are predominantly Asian and increasingly African and increasingly in Latin America, very few Europeans. Now that may fit the narrative that's trying to be built here, that somehow this is a racist policy, that you allow people based on merit to come to the country. The reality is the exact opposite. The reality is that in this country, we have people from all over the world that want to come, and they're the talented people in those countries. I would have, if I was on their side, I'd make a compelling case saying, why do you want to have a brain drain in the countries that they're leaving? Is that a proper policy? That would have been a pretty good point, because I would have argued, well, you might be right about that. But I am interested in the United States of America, and I think that ultimately this is the policy that will yield the very best result. As it relates to your question, we have something called a tourist visa. We have visas. We have millions of people that are granted visas to come see their families. And in most parts, not every country, as we now know, there are certain countries that under the Trump administration are restricted in terms of the number of people that can come. But we have a pretty open system to allow people to come visit. And that's how you deal with Thanksgiving. I don't want to be cynical about this, but I'm going to visit my whole family in Thanksgiving. One of them is from Jordan. One of them is from New Zealand. One of them is from Mexico. I'm an American family, and they're coming from other places. They're getting a visa to be able to come to this country, and I'm happy that they're going to be, and we're going to have a great turkey.
I would just like to address the point that a merit-based system isn't diverse. I noticed Jeb Bush hasn't started talking about gender diversity, and that is a problem, isn't it? Most STEM degrees are given to men. And also, I would like to address the point of the tourist visa. It's actually very expensive to come to this country repeatedly. Why can't we just let them stay here?
So I wanted to ask a question to the opposition. Why should the immigration system prioritize someone from, most people who have extended family in the United States are either in higher social classes in their countries or come from more wealthy countries, why we should prioritize them in an immigration system versus someone who's from a poorer country and has really worked their ass off to get the skills and have the merits to get into the country?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think that this problem becomes worse when you have merit-based immigration because you have to have a degree, and so those people are intrinsically going to be more wealthy and more educated and be more of those types of people that you're talking about. I also think that again, we're not defending the current system as it is, so these are changes that we'd like to be seen put in place, but it kind of trades off when we have these other policies that get put in place, especially because of the political capital that it takes to significantly overhaul an immigration system. I also think that again, having a tourist visa to come visit the US is very expensive, and so it's, again, privileging these people who are already privileged in of the fact that they can come to the United States. So I think we'd be totally open to having more people who are from lower income backgrounds and from different places because that type of diversity is valued.
I would say it's kind of, you're premising it off that people that are coming from poor countries are kind of lazy because they have the opportunities to go to school or they have the opportunities to have success in their home country. But I think the whole reason why they're leaving in the first place is because they weren't able to find it there. And I think that's where the disconnect is. You have an assumption that these people have the ability to go to higher ed, whereas people from other countries are just working harder, but yet maybe they were born into a more wealthy family in a country that had more opportunities for them, but these people weren't, and those are the people we're advocating for.
All right, Governor, thank you so much for coming. I'm an Iraqi citizen. I was born and raised in Baghdad, Iraq. And, coming from, a war-torn Iraq to here, I came here on a full scholarship. I'm a graduate student right now. And, it's been just a privilege just coming here, even sitting next to, one of the members of the Bush family is just an incredible honor. And it's
Don't be too honored. I'm honored to be with you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. It just, it's like a dream. It really is, and it's been always, just surreal. And if this is not the American dream, I don't know what is. Truly. And so, I really love this country, honestly. And so, just coming here, where I come from, family is absolutely extremely central to our lives. It's very, very important. And so have you considered how many people would the United States lose on taking if we don't let, people not have their, dying families, their dying mother or father come, live with them in the States?
So there are visas allowed for family members that are frail and elderly. That is allowed under our laws if it's a humanitarian visa, and it's more than appropriate to do it. Just as a personal point of privilege here, to put a little of this in perspective, because this is an important subject for me for personal reasons. My granddaughter, my oldest granddaughter is 7 years old. Her name is Georgia Helena Walker Bush. She's named after my dad. We call her 41, and that's her nickname. And apart from being beautiful and the smartest kid on the planet, like all grandchildren are, she's a quadra-hyphenated American. Her Gampy is from Texas, and for those that don't know, Texas is a nation, state. Her Abue is from Mexico, and proudly so. Her Nana is from Iraq. Her mom is from Canada. They immigrated in the early 1990s to Toronto, Canada. And so she's a Texas, Mexican, Canadian, Iraqi American. And this is the beauty of our country. And don't get me wrong when I'm talking about the need for a small increase in the number of people coming economically that could create a real tremendous catalyst for good for the country. I do not believe, and I'm one of the few people, I have tire marks on my forehead advocating for an open, legal immigration system against the angry mob. It's important to realize that this immigration, that we're a nation of immigrants, and it creates a vitality that is unique to the world. And it is the one thing that we have that no other country has gotten right, and it's why I'm extraordinarily optimistic that we're going to continue to lead the world. But tweaking our immigration system that has not changed for 30 or 40 years is what policymakers should be doing. And this is a place where it can be tweaked properly to maintain the traditions, the immigrant traditions of our country, and create sustained economic growth, innovation, dynamism from all around the world, not from Germany, which is a great place, don't get me wrong, or not from France, but from all around the world. Welcome.
Are there any questions on the balcony? I don't look up very often.
Right there.
I'll just speak. Thank you, Governor Bush, for coming. I have a question for you. So your main argument is heavily dependent on the assumption that the merit-based immigrants have economic advantages to the domestic economy. And even if we were to take your words for the controversial idea that there's actually no skills gap in the United States with a grain of salt, how would you respond to the view that H-1B workers, for instance, drive down American wages because they're willing to take the same jobs at a lower cost compared to domestic workers that were educated in the America, especially when you responded that you would prioritize America over any other residents from different countries in terms of
First of all, I need to know what the hat means. The hat you're wearing.
Oh, it says optimist, I think. I think.
I like it. Because I'm an optimist as well.
That's great.
We're living in a very pessimistic time. It's nice to see someone wearing it, not on their sleeve, but on their hat. So the H-1B visa program, done right, only exists when there are shortages of labor that can't be filled by domestic workers. When it's abused, as it has been, and needs to be reformed or regulated properly, it does do exactly what you said, which is it ends up, it's not that they're low-skilled workers, they're entering the country at lower wages than what the prevailing wage was on that subject. It's not necessarily that they're minimum wage workers or something like that. So I think we have to be vigilant on that to make sure that that's not the case. But we have a 6 million person skills gap in this country, not all related to IT and STEM related. I get that. There are shortages of truck drivers, there's shortages of welders, of plumbers, of electricians, of information technology workers, and there's shortages for nurses. And to be strategic about this makes a lot of sense. And we have policies in place to bring in nurses temporarily from countries like the Philippines and from Mexico and Costa Rica and other places where appropriate, where the shortages exist. In the rural parts of our country, there are huge shortages. There are maybe 3/4 of all the counties in the United States have declining population. And if we don't stem that tide, there's going to be not just divides related by race and ethnicity and gender and all the things that may be more relevant at the University of Pennsylvania. But we're going to have the rural-urban divide become an even greater challenge. There are places in the big metropolitan areas where literally have been depopulated. Detroit used to be the most populous metropolitan area city in America in 1960 and one of the richest, and today it's basically 1/10 its size. So there's huge opportunities to create a strategy to revitalize the urban parts of our country that have been left behind and the rural parts of our country that are in slow decline. And so I think we need to think a little outside the box here and not worry about each classification of what, you know, this is a nerdy, like really crazy regulatory business that's full of regulations. I'm talking about creating an economic strategy and have a category of immigrants that is focused on what's the future of America look like if we can bring in 300,000 people willing to make a contribution immediately, not all STEM related, not all going to, you know, to Silicon Valley, but a strategy of economic revival for our country. Final thing I'd say, because it's been brought up a couple of times and I've forgotten to bring this up, I've never heard the argument, and it may be true, that there'd be more, as it is today, by the way, with the current system, more men enter our country than women from outside in the current system. And if you move to an economic system, it's possible, STEM-related, for example, there'd be more men. But that's the same issue that exists inside the United States already. We have a problem with women not entering the STEM-related fields, and to suggest that somehow we restrict immigration rather than deal with the issue that we need more women garnering the kind of degrees where we can bring gender equality to these high technology fields kind of ignores the real challenge and the opportunity to get that done better.
We're going to allow one more question.
My question's for Governor Bush. As the opposition stated, one of the things that I thought was kind of interesting when I heard is how typically with more educated people from universities all around the world, they're typically more from wealthier families compared to poorer ones, just because of the opportunities that they have in education during their childhood. So I just was wondering, how would you ensure that in your merit-based immigration system, it wouldn't necessarily be regulated by just those who came from wealthy families? Like, what kind of proxies would you use to ensure that the opportunities weren't only extended to those that had the opportunities to attain education?
Yeah, first of all, I'm not sure that as part of an immigration policy, we need to deal with income inequality. I'm not sure that's the focus ought to be on that. It ought to be on a legal system that creates the greatest benefit to the greatest number of people in our country. All of the social issues that have been discussed here would be secondary to that in my mind. So I would not consider that as high a priority, but I think it's something to be sensitive about. And merit-based to me is not just in these high technology fields. In Florida today, we're about ready to get to the winter vegetable garden spot in South Florida. Florida is the third highest farm income state in the United States, and we have huge shortages in the fields. Not because of something happening here that inhibits people from working. It's hard work. And people don't want to do it anymore because they have opportunities in higher wage jobs, and that's a good thing. But who's gonna pick the crops? Who's gonna, in the surges for the tourism industry, who's gonna clean the beds? Who's gonna take care of a lot of parts of life? I would consider that part of being merit-based. And that gives people opportunities to earn income. Remittances abroad is actually the single biggest form of economic stability in our neighborhood. If we did not have remittances, while it doesn't create the same economic activity here, it creates stability in the Caribbean and in Central America. If Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador had no remittances, I could promise you the run across Mexico to get to the United States border would be an avalanche of people. And to suggest that somehow that isn't of benefit to us, to create some stability in a region that is almost ungovernable right now, I think would be quite dangerous. So great question. I just don't consider it as high a priority as what about the prosperity of America? What about people in this country having opportunities to grow alongside immigrants that can make a great contribution immediately?
Yeah, so I think that the advocacy that remittances are good and will help these poor people is really contradictory to the conception that we want to have people who are benefiting the American economy, especially because that money is leaving our economy as they send remittances. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but I'm just saying that if we want to focus on something that is benefiting the United States, that's not going to be like occurring as much. And the people who are going to be coming here aren't going to be the ones who are going to be sending back remittances if we're capitalizing on prioritizing people who are probably more well off. So I think to your point, I do think it is really important to make sure that people, people aren't just biased to saying that like, if just because you have money, you are more successful and you will be more successful. Like maybe the person that cures cancer will be a refugee or a family member that's brought over, but we haven't given them the opportunity to prove that because we haven't allowed them to access American education and like, all the things that make the American dream possible. So I think it is important that we capitalize on that.
With that, we start our closing speeches. Governor Bush.
Well, I'll be really, really brief now. I appreciate the opponents to the resolution, the research they did, the work they did to prepare very professionally. And I appreciate y'all coming to talk about a really nerdy, important subject. Look, for the last generation, we have missed the possibilities of immigration. We've allowed it to become a political wedge issue. And in doing so, we've divided our country in ways that are quite dangerous. You think about the world and where we're moving. Demographics truly are destiny. Think about China, which is our main economic competitor today. China's elderly population is growing at warp speed. They had a generation of time where they had a one-child policy, which yielded a significant number of males, babies that were men, but boys being brought into the world compared to girls, almost 25%. So now you have an entire cadre of people that are at the age where family formation could take place. Women have seen economic activity and opportunities grow significantly, and so they're not marrying, similar to what's happening in the United States, and they're not forming families, and they're not having children. And the net effect is our demographic time bomb, which is a challenge, can be fixed. Theirs cannot. Japan, the third largest economy of the world, has race as a national identifier. It's a beautiful culture, and they're proud of their culture as they should be. It's an incredible country in so many ways. But they're unable to bring immigrants in and allow them to be Japanese. All of Europe is going through the exact same challenge as they have large waves of immigrants coming from Northern Africa and the Middle East, and they're allowed in out of an act of compassion, but in reality they're not treated as though they're first-class citizens. And you have social strife because of that. We're the only country in the world, other than smaller countries, I would say Israel's an example where their national identity is based on their religion, and other countries that are similar to ours. But we're the only country of scale that could use immigration on a sustained basis as the basis for innovation, for dynamism, for economic growth, for wage growth for all of us. And what we have to get right is to take it out of the political context and recognize the significant economic potential that this brings. I'm not suggesting eliminating traditional immigration based on family. You've heard me say that. I'm saying narrow the number of people that come by family to what every other country in the world has, spouse and minor children. Create a system then that could create sustained economic growth over the long haul. If we get this part right, I have total confidence that the interaction of 350 million or 340 million people 10 years from now amongst ourselves will create more prosperity, more benefits, more cures of disease, more all the things we want more of than any other country in the world. If we don't get our immigration system right and allow it to be festering inside this political hellhole, which it is where it is right now, where the left attacks the right and the right attacks the left, we're going to end up with missing the greatest opportunity we have of this generation. Thank you. Okay. Thank you very much.
Opposition, I welcome your closing speech. I invite everyone to stay so we can vote after this closing speech.
So I would like to talk, before I go into this reading, But something that Governor Bush talked about is that he's going to narrow or shrink the amount of family-based immigrants you're going to bring. And like I mentioned in my body speech, is that Mexico, I would say, has brought a lot of immigrants within the last 10 years. And even shrinking, I believe, a small amount of family-based immigrants would only increase illegal immigration. And I think that's something that Governor Bush hasn't really talked about. Secondly, he talked about how we should be stapling or putting a visa with every diploma. But I think if you want to kind of help the immigration surge or problem, what you have to do is allow those people to go back to those countries to then make them better. If you're taking away all their educated people, and Governor Bush wants those countries to succeed, then how is that country ever going to become better? Another thing, I think it's immoral to say that economic gain or the economic gain that you can give to a country supersedes your life as a human being. And I think not allowing people to come here and prove themselves to be merit-worthy does that. Now, I think it's really important to remember our history. Unless you are Native American, you came from somewhere else. And in the past, as each wave of immigrants arrived to the United States, they faced resistance from those who were already here. They faced hardship, racism, ridicule, but over time, as they went on with their daily endeavors and built a life, raised their children, they made the United States a great nation. My mom came to the United States more than 25 years ago with a middle school education and did not know how to read or write English. Without her brave decision to immigrate to this country, I would not have been able to serve this, luckily my country, by enlisting in the Marine Corps. And believe it or not, immigrants and their children have higher levels of patriotism and trust in our government institutions than native-born Americans. My mother did not have a college degree, nor did she have a couple of millions of dollars to meet merit-based requirements, but she raised Americans that care and love this country. My story and the story of my mother isn't unique. There are millions of other families with similar circumstances who came to this country, worked hard for a better life, and were able to improve their circumstances. How did they do it? Well, they were able to do it because they had the support of a family. And I assume our current president in the White House understands this best. President Trump proposed a merit-based immigration system a few years back. Yet, Trump hired his daughter as a presidential advisor and allowed her to attend and interact with world leaders at the G20 summit, which left me with the question, was she hired based on merit? So I'll let you decide. And I mention this because the strongest proponents of merit-based immigration seem to like applying merit requirements when it only fits one's own agenda. Like, family is crucial, and people like Trump and Governor Bush, which oppose a family-based immigration system, know that without their family, they would not be where they are today. Now, I'll finish with a quote from Governor Bush, when he sent his father a letter, Vice President George Bush at the time, to investigate the detention of Cuban children in Texas, asking, shouldn't there be some compassion? I ask now, shouldn't there be more compassion for American citizens and their immigrant family members to immigrate to the U.S.? Thank you.
First off, thank you to both sides, and now I'll introduce our caucus chairs. So the way this is going to work is that you are going to go to the caucus that you feel most represents you. So to begin, the chair of our progressive caucus, Michael. The chair of our liberal caucus, Haven. I'm the one that have to say. The chair of our centrist caucus is currently indisposed, so he will not be recording the votes, but Samar. We'll be collecting the votes. So, and the chair of our libertarian caucus is not here. So, Adam. And the chair of our conservative caucus, Chris. So, if you have any questions, please go to caucus. You feel most represented.
Put your hand up. Put your hand up.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, that was fun.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry about that. I apologize.
That was kind of a cheap shot.
Sorry.
A little weak. And we have a similar immigrant experience. My wife came, her dad was Mexican, he came, but that would have existed in the proposal that I made.
Okay.
Family defined by spouse and minor children includes a great majority of the people that come for that reason. 3/4. So it's, but I enjoyed it. It was great. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Yeah,
you
it was
so
fun.
much for doing this.
So which caucus are you looking for? Centrist caucus is back there with Simone. And yes, so please talk to your caucus chair to record your vote. We will be voting in 2 minutes. All right, I think we're going to start recording the votes. All right, I think we're going to start recording the votes. If everyone could just quiet down quickly. Shh. Thank you. Thank you. So, Progressive Caucus, how do you plead? 4 nay, 1 aye, 0 abstentions? All right. Liberal Caucus.
2 aye, 7 nay, and 1 abstention.
Centrist Caucus. 11 aye, 1 nay. And 0 abstention? All right. Libertarian Caucus.
2 aye, 2 nay, 0 abstention.
Conservative Caucus.
8 aye, 0 abstention.
0 for both. Okay. All right. Can you go down to the totals, Jackson? The resolution passes. Resolved, the U.S. should implement a merit-based immigration system. Thank you, everyone, for coming out. If you'd like to get involved with PPU, talk to us.